So the Nintendo Switch Pro is definitely a thing, and apparently it will be releasing sometime this year, 2021. Here is everything we know about the Nintendo Switch Pro thus far. Let's get into it. So when news about the Nintendo Switch Pro first started circulating, I was like, man, this happens every single year. Most likely just rumors again. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole of continuing to cover developments of the Nintendo Switch Pro just to find out that they're made up rumors. But no, this is much different. Article after article continues to drop about the Nintendo Switch Pro with some pretty specific details as to the hardware, along with some statements from Nintendo themselves. So briefly touching on the hardware of the Nintendo Switch Pro, we know that it's going to have a 7-inch OLED display, which is fantastic to hear. I don't really have a problem with the current screen size of the Nintendo Switch, but a bigger screen is always welcome. The OLED panel will consume less battery, offer higher contrast, and possibly a faster response time when compared to the Switch's current liquid crystal display. According to the report, the new display will be manufactured by Samsung and will start production in June, with assemblers due to receive the first batch in July of this year. So the Nintendo Switch Pro will have a 7-inch OLED display by Samsung, which is a move that you would think they should have started with. But I'm very happy to hear that this is coming to the Nintendo Switch Pro, as Samsung makes the best displays in the game. Despite the larger screen, the new Switch will continue to display content in 720p resolution in handheld mode, according to the Bloomberg report, but will be able to support a 4K display when docked. It also goes on to say that Nintendo has been asking game developers to make their games 4K ready in preparation for this new console. Nvidia is apparently preparing to end production of its Tegra X1 Miraco processor this year. This is the processor that is currently installed in every current Nintendo Switch and Switch Lite. And I definitely do not blame Nvidia for getting rid of this chip. This chip is outdated. This is why when you play games like MK11, in comparison to the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox or the PC, where you punch somebody and there's a bunch of blood and guts coming out, on the Nintendo Switch, everything comes out in a bunch of chunks and it looks terrible. Nintendo pulling the trigger and deciding to go with this chip to begin with was definitely a strange move. It gets the job done, but it doesn't do it well. And as we all know, especially during this pandemic, the current Nintendo Switch and Switch Lite is selling very, very well even still. So if they're going to stop production of the Tegra X1 Miraco processor or the chip that is found inside of every Nintendo Switch, then Nintendo has no choice but to create and sell an upgraded version of the Nintendo Switch and Switch Lite with a brand new processor if they want to continue to sell Switches at all. Just as the console passes the 4-year point, Nintendo President Shuntaro Furuwaka discusses the hardware and its lifespan. For our company, it's a big topic. What we should do next when a console passes its 5th year and its hardware's life cycle is in the process of getting longer, Furuwaka explained. So Nintendo President Furuwaka doesn't directly say that a new Switch is coming, but I think it means something when a bunch of articles surface about how the Nintendo Switch Pro is coming, and Nintendo's president doesn't deny it, but instead goes on about how, this Nintendo Switch is getting pretty old. But let's move on to a series of quotes, because the most positive part about this article here is his attitude. I love it. Furuwaka goes on to say, because you must do all sorts of various preparations to make one new console, the truth is that you cannot stop. Ultimately, the deciding factor as to whether or not something becomes an actual product is whether or not it creates a new experience. But even though the first few years of the Switch have been wildly successful, Furuwaka is not complacent. Furuwaka then goes on to say, currently the Switch's sales are exceedingly favorable and achievements are also good, but I have zero peace of mind. No matter the hits, in the entertainment business, people someday do lose interest. Up until now, we have repeatedly had the experience of our business taking a nosedive. I love this man's transparency, honesty, and attitude. Yes, Nintendo has seen some very high highs and some extremely low lows. While reading that, I instantly thought about how back in 2014, Nintendo President Iwata, or he was president at the time, cut his salary by 50% because the Wii U bombed so badly, and this was him propping up the business. Mad respect to that man, because who knows what Nintendo would have been if he didn't do that, if he didn't cut his own salary to make sure Nintendo continued to stay afloat for their next project. But I think this is a product of the way Nintendo operates. We all love and cherish Nintendo because they're willing to try new things and take risks, like remember the Nintendo 3DS. But with taking risks like that, you can hit and you can miss, and when you hit, you can come out with things like the Nintendo Switch a fucking hybrid where you can take it on the go and dock it and play it on your TV, and there's nothing else like it. It's absolutely incredible and everyone loves it. But when they miss, they can come out with things like the Wii U and take a 30% revenue loss in 9 months. So this part I didn't know. In addition to President Iwata back in 2014 taking a 50% pay cut, members of his board also took a pay cut between 20 and 30%. Those are leaders. Now back to President Furukawa, he then goes on to say, because of this, I myself as well as those within the company do not at all think the current state of events will keep on going and going. For Furukawa, he believes that every single year is a do or die situation. Furukawa continues and says, you must give new customers fresh surprises, and our existence can slip into obscurity at any time. I always have this kind of sense of crisis. This is something you want to hear a CEO or president of a company say, because that tells you that they're constantly trying to do their best, which means better products for the customer. Now, all of this brings us to the most recent news about the Nintendo Switch Pro, which talks about some downsides, being that there may be some exclusives. There will be some select exclusives, especially from third-party partners. There may not be a big number of them, but I know of at least one. So now when I first read that, I was very confused. I was like, why is this so polarizing? Why are some people upset by that? Yeah, it's a new console, so there should be exclusives for it. It's more capable. It has better specs going on in comparison to the original Switch. And I thought about it, and that's like before the PlayStation 5 comes out, the PlayStation 4 Pro comes out, and then there's exclusives for the PlayStation 4 Pro. And it's like, why, how does that make sense? But thinking about it even further, I don't really understand why they need to do exclusives at all. Yes, I understand that the Switch Pro would be a more capable device, but why can't you just do downgraded versions of those games for the Switch like you've done with any other game? And lastly, this article goes on to explain that yes, the Nintendo Switch Pro is coming out sometime this year, but it says most likely in the second half of this year. So it's coming a lot sooner than anyone expected. So as we were reading through all of these articles, one thing I could not stop thinking about is Nintendo President Furukawa and the things that he said. What he said was awesome. As Nintendo fans, we should all deeply appreciate what he said because he shows a sense of urgency. He shows a sense of care for us as consumers, us as Nintendo fans, us as gamers. And he shows that he, gives a shit about putting out the best products as frequently as Nintendo can. But one thing I can't shake is that all of this is happening around the same time NVIDIA is dropping the Tegra X1 Miracle processor that the Nintendo Switch has. So even though he said very pretty things, one thing I can't help but think is, if NVIDIA didn't drop the processor that the Nintendo Switch uses, would we even see a Switch Pro? I gave Furukawa a lot of praise earlier, so I was just thinking, is this theater to make himself look like the cool, bold, awesome leader, but in reality, all that's happening over at Nintendo is that they're freaking out because NVIDIA dropped the chip that the Switch uses, so now they have no choice, even if they didn't want to make a new Switch because the Switch is selling very well currently? Because honestly, with how well the base Nintendo Switch is still selling, they could have easily just sat back and continued to collect the money. The thing is, I want to be excited about the Nintendo Switch Pro coming out, but scalpers have been terrible the past, year and a half. I don't see myself being able to get one, or many people being able to get one, if scalpers continue to do the same thing they did with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and S, the same thing they're still doing, which is using bots to purchase these consoles faster than the human reaction time in fucking droves. Also, Nintendo, fix the eShop. Make it better. Also, add themes and folders to the Nintendo Switch and get Netflix, Hulu, Crunchyroll, get all that shit on there. Come on. And also Disney Plus and HBO Max. Thank you. Anyway, guys, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments section. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.